Humans were outnumbered by the alien Armada. Then Earth revealed its hidden second fleet. The sky above Earth had never looked so crowded. Thousands of alien ships hung in orbit like a swarm of dark insects, blotting out the stars that people once used to wish upon. Down on the surface, in cities from Tokyo to New York, people stood in the streets and stared upward, phones raised, hands shaking. Nobody spoke much. There was nothing to say that would make the sight any less terrifying. Admiral Sarah Cade watched the same view from the bridge of the ISS Endeavour, the flagship of the Seoul Defense Fleet. She did not raise her phone. She did not need to record what she was seeing. She would remember it for the rest of her life, however long that turned out to be. "Confirm the count," she said, her voice steady despite the tightness in her chest. Commander Reyes, her second in command, read from the display without looking up. 11,200 vessels, Admiral. That's the current estimate. Long-range sensors say more are still arriving from the direction of the Kuiper Belt. 11,000. Sarah did the math in her head, the same math every officer on every human ship was doing right now. The Seoul Defense Fleet had 640 ships ready for combat. 640 against 11,000, with more on the way. It wasn't a battle. It was a formality, before a slaughter. "Do we have a read on their intentions?" Sarah asked. "Not directly," Reyes said, "but High Marshal Threxus of the Zorath Dominion sent a message an hour ago. It's addressed to, quote, the leadership of this water world. Would you like to hear it?" Sarah nodded once. The message played over the bridge speakers. The alien voice was deep and resonant, translated by the ship's computer into calm, almost gentle English, which made the words feel even colder. "People of Earth, I am High Marshal Threxus, commander of the 3rd Zorath Armada. Your world sits at the edge of territory claimed by the Dominion 3,000 years ago, before your species learned to walk upright. You have built ships. You have built weapons. This is understandable. Young species often mistake survival instinct for strength. But you cannot resist what has come to your sky. Surrender your fleet, your worlds, and your resources, and your species will be permitted to continue. As a labor population under Dominion law, resist, and you will be removed, the way one removes an insect nest from a doorway. You have one full rotation of your planet to respond." The message ended. Silence filled the bridge. 24 hours, Reyes said quietly. Sarah looked out at the wall of alien ships again. She had spent 30 years in the fleet. She had commanded ships in the asteroid conflicts, in the Mars blockade crisis, in a dozen tense standoffs that never became wars. She had never once imagined she would be the officer standing on the bridge when humanity faced its first true test of survival against something from beyond the solar system. "Get me a secure line to Earth Command," she said, "and patch in Vice Admiral Chen, wherever he is." Reyes hesitated for half a second before responding. "Yes, Admiral." That hesitation told Sarah everything. Reyes did not know where Marcus Chen was. Almost nobody did. That was exactly how it was supposed to be. 3 years earlier, in a windowless room deep beneath the Nevada desert, a small group of officers and scientists had gathered around a table to discuss something that, at the time, sounded like paranoid fantasy. The first contact event, as it later came to be called, had happened 18 months before that meeting. A single Zorath scout ship had entered the outer solar system, observed human infrastructure for 6 days, and then left without communication. It should have been a minor footnote in history. Instead, it triggered a decision that would shape the next decade of human civilization. General Okafor, then head of Earth Defense Coordination, had put it simply: if they come back, and they come back in force, we lose. Not might lose, lose. Our public fleet cannot match a species that has had spaceflight for longer than we've had written language. So we build 2 fleets. One fleet the whole galaxy can see. One fleet nobody sees at all. It was Marcus Chen, then a young but respected engineer-turned-officer, who proposed where to hide it. Not behind the moon, too obvious, too close, too easily scanned by long-range sensors. Not in the asteroid belt, too unstable, too easily discovered by mining traffic. Instead, Chen suggested building in the cold dark beyond Neptune, inside the icy shell of a dwarf planet called Orcus, using its natural mass and mineral density to mask the electromagnetic signature of construction, and later, of docked ships. It took 3 years, thousands of workers who never spoke about their jobs to family, cover stories about deep space mining operations, and a budget hidden inside a dozen unrelated government programs. But by the time the Zorath Armada crossed into the solar system, Fleet Hydra was real. 412 ships, built using technology reverse-engineered from debris left behind after a skirmish with a smaller Zorath patrol 2 years prior, technology the Dominion did not know humanity possessed. Marcus Chen now commanded that fleet from its command ship, the Prometheus, tucked inside a carved-out chamber within Orcus itself, running on minimal power, invisible to every sensor sweep the Zorath Armada had performed so far. When the call came through from Admiral Cade, Chen answered instantly. "Sarah," he said, "I take it Threxus made his little speech." "Word for word about what we expected," Sarah replied. 24 hours, then Earth burns unless we surrender. Marcus, are you seeing what I'm seeing? 11,000 ships. Command projected maybe 3,000 as the worst case. "I'm seeing it," Chen said grimly. "And I don't like it any more than you do. But the plan hasn't changed. We can't move Hydra until the moment is right. If we reveal ourselves too early, they adjust and we lose the only advantage we have. And if we wait too long, there's no Sol fleet left to save," Sarah said. There was a pause on the line. Chen understood exactly what she meant. The plan, built over years of careful wargaming, required the visible fleet to fight. Not to win. Nobody expected the 640 ships of the Sol Defense Fleet to win against 11,000 alien vessels. But to fight long enough, to bleed the Zorath Armada, to make Threxus commit his ships into a battle formation, to make him confident, arrogant, careless. Only then would Hydra strike, from a direction and with a force the Dominion could never anticipate. It was a plan that asked real people to die, so that a trap could work. "I know what I'm asking of your crews," Chen said quietly. "I know what I'm asking of you." "You're not asking anything I didn't already agree to 3 years ago," Sarah said. "I just didn't expect the number to be this big." "Numbers don't win wars, Sarah. You know that better than most people alive." "Sometimes they do," she said, "but not always." "Get your people ready, Marcus. I'll buy you the time you need." The line went dead. Sarah stood at the center of the bridge, surrounded by the low hum of systems and the quiet, focused breathing of a crew that had trained for this moment for years, without ever truly believing it would come. "Send my compliments to every ship in the fleet," she said to Reyes. "Full readiness, all hands, and patch me through to Earth Command. It's time to tell the President what we're actually facing." Down on Earth, in a reinforced command bunker, beneath what used to be a national park before the government quietly built underneath it, President Elena Marsh listened to Admiral Cade's report with her hands folded tightly on the table in front of her. 11,000 ships, she repeated slowly. "Admiral, our public estimates for the entire Zorath Dominion's known fleet strength was 4,000. They must have called in reinforcements from other border regions," Sarah said, her voice coming through clearly despite the distance. "Or they've been building for longer than our intelligence suggested. Either way, Madam President, this is what we're facing. The Sol Defense Fleet alone cannot win this battle." Marsh closed her eyes for a moment. Around the table, generals, advisors, and members of the newly formed Earth Unity Council sat in tense silence. "And Fleet Hydra?" Marsh asked. 412 ships, fully crewed, fully armed, still hidden, Sarah said. "Vice Admiral Chen confirms readiness. But Madam President, I need to be honest with you. Even combined, our total forces are just over 1,000 ships against 11,000. The numbers alone don't favor us. We are relying entirely on surprise, on technology they don't know we have, and on Threxus underestimating us long enough for it to matter." "And if he doesn't underestimate us?" asked General Okafor, now much older than he had been in that Nevada meeting room, his hair fully gray, but his eyes as sharp as ever. "Then we lose everything," Sarah said simply. "There's no comforting answer to that question, General. I won't pretend there is one." The room went quiet. President Marsh looked around the table at the faces of people who had spent years preparing for a moment they hoped would never truly arrive. She thought about the billions of people above them and around the world, going about their lives under a sky now dominated by an alien war fleet, waiting for leaders they trusted to find some way through. "Send our response to High Marshal Threxus," Marsh said finally. Tell him Earth refuses to surrender. Madam President, one of her advisors said carefully, that guarantees an attack. An attack is coming either way, Marsh said. The only question is whether we meet it as a free species making a choice, or a conquered one that never tried. Send the message, Admiral, and then get your fleet ready. Earth is counting on all of you. Yes, Madam President, Sarah said. The channel closed. Sarah stood alone on the bridge for a long moment, looking at the tactical display that showed the overwhelming red cluster of alien ships surrounding a small blue dot that represented home. She thought about her daughter, 12 years old, currently in a shelter beneath Denver, with millions of other children evacuated from coastal cities in the past week, as a precaution nobody had wanted to explain honestly. She thought about the crew of the Endeavor, young officers who had trained on simulations their entire careers, and were now about to face something no simulation could fully prepare them for. She thought about Marcus Chen, sitting in the freezing dark beyond Neptune, with 400 ships that represented humanity's last, best secret. Reyes, she said, signal the fleet. All ships to combat stations. We move to intercept position in 3 hours. Aye, Admiral, Reyes said, and for the first time since the alien armada had appeared, there was something steady in his voice, something that sounded almost like resolve. Across the Sol defense fleet, 640 ships began to move into formation, small and outnumbered against the vast dark wall of the Zorath Armada, but moving forward anyway, because that was what humans had always done when faced with odds that should have stopped them. They had built ships to cross oceans that swallowed sailors whole. They had built rockets to leave a planet that could kill them the moment air ran out. They had built weapons, and shelters, and fleets, and hope, again and again, because giving up had never once been in their nature. High Marshal Threxus received Earth's refusal aboard his flagship, the Devastation's Crown, a vessel larger than any human city, capable of leveling a continent from orbit with a single sustained barrage. He read the human response twice, translated carefully by his intelligence officers, and allowed himself a low, rumbling sound that in his species passed for something between amusement and contempt. They refuse, he said to his second-in-command, a sharp-eyed officer named Vesk. 600 ships against 11,000, and they refuse. Perhaps they do not understand the numbers, Marshal, Vesk offered. Or perhaps, Threxus said, turning back to the viewport where the small blue planet hung against the stars. They understand nothing at all. It does not matter. Bring the Armada into standard attack formation. We begin in 6 hours. Let the humans see exactly what they have chosen. He did not know, could not have known, that far beyond the edge of his sensor range, in the frozen dark near a dwarf planet named Orcus, 412 ships sat silent and waiting, and that the true battle for Earth had not yet even begun. While the fleets prepared for war above, life below tried to continue in the strange, suspended way that people manage when disaster has not yet arrived, but is clearly on its way. Schools closed early. Grocery stores ran out of canned food within hours. Families packed small bags they hoped they would never need to use, and argued quietly over whether to travel to the underground shelters that had been built years earlier, for reasons the government had always described only vaguely, as planetary defense infrastructure. In Denver, 12-year-old Mia Cade sat in a long line of children, waiting to be processed into Shelter 7, one of nearly 40 such facilities built beneath the Rocky Mountains over the past decade. She held her mother's photograph in her hand, an old picture from before Sarah Cade had become an admiral, back when she was simply a young lieutenant grinning at the camera beside a training shuttle. "Is your mom really up there?" asked the boy, standing next to her in line, a nervous 10-year-old named Devon who had been separated from his parents in the evacuation chaos 2 days earlier. "She's the admiral," Mia said, trying to sound braver than she felt. "She's in charge of the whole fleet." Devon looked at her with wide eyes. "Do you think we're going to be okay?" Mia did not answer right away. She had heard enough late-night conversations through thin apartment walls, enough hushed calls between her mother and unfamiliar officers, to understand that grown-ups did not actually know the answer to that question, no matter how calm they tried to sound. But she also remembered something her mother had told her once, back when she was younger and afraid of a much smaller kind of dark. "My mom says being scared doesn't mean you stop doing what's right," Mia said. "She says the fleet trained for this. All of it. For years. So maybe they know something we don't. She did not know, sitting in that line with her small bag and her mother's photograph, just how true those words actually were. Meanwhile, in orbit, preparations continued at a pace that left little room for rest. On the flight deck of the carrier Liberty Bell, Captain Diego Alvarez ran through pre-flight checks with the same careful precision he always used, though his hands trembled slightly more than usual as he tightened the straps of his flight suit. "You good, Falcon?" asked his wingman, Lieutenant Priya Osei, watching him from the neighboring launch bay. "Define good," Diego said, forcing a small, tired smile. 11,000 ships up there, Priya. I've flown against maybe 30 simulated enemy craft at once in training, and that felt like plenty. We've trained for exactly this, Priya said. Every scenario, every simulation, all of it built around fighting outnumbered. Command didn't design those drills for fun. No, Diego agreed. They designed them because somebody, somewhere, always suspected this day might come. Across the fleet, similar quiet conversations played out in cramped quarters and crowded mess halls, crews saying things to each other they might never have said under ordinary circumstances. Small confessions of fear, small promises to look out for each other, small jokes that landed a little too hard because everyone needed something to laugh at before the fighting began. On the bridge of the Endeavour, Admiral Sarah Cade reviewed the final battle plan one more time with her senior staff, a plan that had been refined and rehearsed for 3 years, but had never once been tested against a force this size. "Walk me through the timeline again," she said to her chief tactical officer, Commander Elias Voss, a quiet, precise man who had helped design much of the engagement strategy. "We hold the outer perimeter as long as possible," Voss said, pointing to the display. "We accept losses in a controlled, gradual pattern designed to look like natural attrition rather than a deliberate strategy. Our goal is to make Threxus believe he is winning decisively, without giving him any reason to suspect we are managing the pace of our own collapse." "And if he sees through it?" Sarah asked. "Then we lose Fleet Hydra's element of surprise, and likely, the entire engagement," Voss said bluntly. "There is no version of this plan that does not carry that risk, Admiral. We have built in every safeguard we can, but ultimately, this depends on Threxus behaving the way every piece of intelligence we have suggests he will behave, with confidence bordering on arrogance." Sarah nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of that assessment. She had read the same intelligence reports dozens of times over the past 3 years. Psychological profiles built from decades of observed Dominion military behavior across other conquered systems. Patterns of overwhelming force followed by methodical, almost bureaucratic occupation procedures. Every report pointed to the same conclusion. The Zorath Dominion had not lost a major engagement in over 2 centuries, and that unbroken record of victory had bred a dangerous kind of certainty in its commanders.
"Get some rest if you can,"
she told her staff.
"All of you. Once this begins, none of us will have the luxury of rest again for a very long time."
Nobody on the bridge actually left to rest. Instead, they remained at their stations, running final diagnostics, double-checking weapon calibrations, reviewing crew assignments, needing the work more than they needed sleep, because work gave their hands something to do besides shake. Far beyond Neptune, in the carved chamber within Orcus, Vice Admiral Marcus Chen walked the length of the Prometheus's main corridor, greeting crew members by name as he passed, a habit he had maintained since the earliest days of Fleet Hydra's construction. Many of these men and women had spent 3 years away from their families, living under strict secrecy protocols that forbade even the smallest hint of their true assignment. "Admiral," said a young engineer named Tomas Reyes, no relation to Sarah's second-in-command aboard the Endeavour, though the coincidence had caused some confusion when the 2 officers had once exchanged messages during a joint training exercise years earlier. "Diagnostic on the Prometheus's main weapons array is complete. Everything reads green." "Good work, Tomas," Chen said. "How's your family holding up? I know it's been hard, all this time without being able to tell them where you really are." Tomas hesitated before answering. "My wife thinks I've been working on a mining survey contract this whole time. She's angry with me for missing our daughter's last 2 birthdays. I couldn't tell her the truth, obviously, but some days I wonder if the secrecy was worth what it cost at home." Chen placed a hand on the young engineer's shoulder. "I can't give you back those birthdays, Tomas. I wish I could. But if what we've built here today saves her life, and the life of everyone you love, then I have to believe it mattered. I have to believe all of it mattered. Do you really believe that, Admiral? Or do you just need to say it? It was a fair question, and Chen respected Tomas enough to consider it seriously before answering. Both, probably. I've spent 3 years telling myself the same thing every single day. Some days I believe it more than others. Today, with everything on the line, I believe it as much as I ever have. Tomas nodded, seeming to take some comfort in the honesty of the answer, and returned to his post. Chen continued down the corridor, checking in with crew after crew, carrying the same quiet, steady reassurance to everyone he met, even as his own doubts churned beneath the surface of his calm exterior. In the command center, his intelligence officer, a sharp young woman named Captain Ilsa Brandt, monitored the incoming data feed from the battle beginning to unfold near Earth. "Admiral, the Sol defense fleet has moved into intercept position," she reported. "Zorath forces are advancing as expected. Estimated time until first contact, approximately 4 hours." Chen took his seat at the command console, feeling the familiar, heavy weight of responsibility settle over him. 412 ships, thousands of crew members. An entire species' fate, in some meaningful sense, riding on decisions he would need to make in the hours ahead. "Signal all ships," he said. "Final systems check. We may be moving sooner than planned if the battle develops faster than projected. I want every ship ready to launch on a moment's notice." Across the hidden fleet, thousands of crew members began their own final preparations, running through checklists they had rehearsed hundreds of times in simulation, but never once for real, knowing that everything they had built and trained for over 3 years of secrecy was about to be tested in the most important battle any of them would likely ever fight. The Sol defense fleet moved into position exactly as planned, 640 ships spreading into a wide defensive formation between the Zorath Armada and the inner planets. From the bridge of the Endeavor, Admiral Sarah Cade watched the tactical display as the alien fleet began its slow, deliberate advance. It did not rush. It did not need to. 11,000 ships could afford patience. "They're not even breaking formation," Reyes said, studying the sensor readouts. "It's like watching a wall move." "That's exactly what it is," Sarah said. "Threxus wants us to see the size of what we're facing before a single shot is fired. He wants us afraid." "Is it working?" Reyes asked, and there was no shame in the question. Every person on the bridge felt the same tightness in their chest. "It doesn't matter if it's working," Sarah said. "We fight anyway. Order all ships to hold position at the outer marker. Fighters into ready stations. Point defense systems online. We let them come to us." Across the fleet, 640 human ships settled into their final positions, their crews strapped in, weapons charged, hearts pounding. On the science vessel Halcyon, technicians ran real-time analysis of Zorath shield frequencies, feeding data back to the fleet's targeting computers. On the carrier Liberty Bell, 300 human fighter pilots sat in their cockpits, watching the growing wall of alien ships through their canopies, some praying, some simply breathing slowly to keep their hands steady. At the 4-hour mark, the Zorath Armada crossed the outer marker. "Contact!" called out the tactical officer on the Endeavor. "Enemy fighters launching. Estimated count, 4,000 small craft, moving to engage our screen." "All fighter squadrons, launch," Sarah ordered. "Carrier groups, protect your launch bays. Everyone else, hold the line." Space around Earth's orbital defense zone erupted into motion. Human fighters streaked out from their carriers, small and fast, meeting the incoming wave of Zorath fighters in a chaotic storm of weapons fire and maneuvering. The two forces were not evenly matched in raw numbers, 4,000 alien fighters against just over 2,000 human craft. But human pilots had trained for this exact scenario for years, running simulations against opponents modeled on captured Zorath fighter data from the earlier skirmish that had given humanity its technological edge. Captain Diego Alvarez, callsign Falcon, rolled his fighter hard to avoid a burst of alien plasma fire and fired back with a tight spread of missiles that found their mark against an enemy craft's weaker rear shields. The alien fighter spun apart in a bright flash. "Splash one," he called over comms, more out of habit than celebration. There was no time to celebrate. 3 more Zorath fighters were already converging on his position. Across the battlefield, Similar fights played out by the hundreds. Human ships were smaller, faster, and used weapon systems the Zorath had not encountered before, adapted from technology recovered from the skirmish debris years earlier. It gave human pilots an edge that alien commanders had not expected, and for the first hour of battle, the fighter engagement was closer to even than anyone on either side had predicted. But numbers eventually tell. As the battle stretched into its second hour, Zorath reinforcement waves kept launching from the main armada, replacing losses faster than human carriers could replace theirs. Slowly, steadily, the balance began to shift. "Admiral, Liberty Bell reports 30% fighter losses," Reyes said. Determination and Valiant report similar numbers. Sarah's jaw tightened. "Understood. Order carrier groups to begin recovery of remaining fighters. It's time to bring the capital ships into direct engagement." This was the moment the plan had anticipated and dreaded. The Sol Defense Fleet's 640 capital ships began moving forward to directly engage the front edge of the Zorath Armada, buying more time, drawing more of Threxus's attention and resources into a battle he could not afford to lose quickly, even against a smaller opponent, because losing quickly would mean losing efficiently, and Threxus valued efficiency above all else. He wanted to grind the human fleet down methodically, to demonstrate Dominion's superiority without unnecessary losses. That instinct for careful, deliberate destruction was exactly what Fleet Hydra's plan depended on. The heavy cruiser ISS Valor took the first serious hit of the capital engagement, a concentrated plasma barrage from 3 Zorath warships that overwhelmed its shields and tore through its outer hull. Fires broke out across 4 decks. Emergency crews fought to contain the damage, while the ship's weapons continued firing, refusing to go silent, even as it took more punishment. "Valor reports hull breach on decks 9 through 12, came the report over fleet-wide comms. They're requesting permission to fall back for repairs. "Denied," Sarah said, the word costing her more than anyone on the bridge could see in her face. "Tell Valor to hold position and keep firing. Every ship that falls back early creates a gap in the line, and gaps get exploited. I know what I'm asking." The Valor held. Its crew, badly wounded and desperately fighting fires in the dark, kept its weapons trained on the enemy formation, buying precious minutes that mattered more than any single ship's survival. 2 hours into the capital ship engagement, Zorath losses stood at 312 vessels, mostly smaller escort ships, and a handful of mid-sized cruisers. Sol Fleet losses stood at 190 ships, a devastating number, nearly a third of the entire visible fleet, but exactly within the range that Chen and Cade's wargaming had projected as necessary to keep Threxus fully engaged and confident. On the devastation's crown, High Marshal Threxus watched the battle unfold with a growing, dangerous satisfaction. "Their losses outpace ours by a wide margin," Vesk reported. "At this rate, their fleet will be reduced to ineffective status within another 3 hours. "Good," Threxus said. "Continue the advance. No need to rush. Let them exhaust themselves against our strength. It will make the eventual occupation of their world far smoother if their military spirit is broken before we even land." It was exactly the kind of thinking Chen and Cade had hoped for. An enemy who believed victory was already secured was an enemy who stopped watching his flanks, stopped worrying about surprises, stopped keeping reserves ready for anything but mopping up what remained. Threxus, confident in his overwhelming numbers, had no reason to suspect that anything beyond what he could already see posed a threat to his armada. Back on the Endeavor, Sarah received an update that made her blood run cold despite everything she already knew about the risks of this battle. "Admiral, long-range sensors just picked up movement," Reyes said, his voice tight. "A secondary Zorath group, roughly 800 ships, breaking off from the main formation. They're moving toward Mars." Sarah's stomach dropped. Mars held nearly 2 million human colonists, the largest off-world settlement in the solar system, home to critical manufacturing facilities that supported both fleets. It had never been part of the plan for the Zorath Armada to split its forces this early. Threxus, despite his overconfidence, was still thinking ahead, still hedging his bets by threatening a second target. "They're trying to force us to split our own fleet to defend it," Sarah said. "If we do, we weaken our line here. If we don't, Mars falls, and we lose everything the colony provides." "Orders, Admiral?" Reyes asked. Sarah thought fast. running through options in the small window of time she had, before the decision would make itself, simply by being delayed too long. Send the 3rd Escort Squadron to Mars. 40 ships. It's not enough to stop 800, but it will slow them down, and it will make Threxus believe we're desperate enough to weaken our main line for a secondary target. That plays right into what he already believes about us. And if 40 ships isn't enough? It won't be, Sarah admitted quietly, but it buys Mars evacuation time, and it keeps our real line intact here. I don't like this decision, Reyes. I don't think there is a version of this where I like any decision I make today. The 3rd Escort Squadron broke formation and streaked toward Mars at maximum burn, their crews receiving the news of their assignment with grim, silent acceptance. They knew the math as well as anyone. 40 ships against 800 was not a battle meant to be won. It was a battle meant to buy time, measured in the lives of everyone aboard those 40 vessels. Meanwhile, deep in the frozen dark beyond Neptune, Vice Admiral Marcus Chen received real-time updates on the battle from a secure relay network built specifically to remain undetectable by Zorath sensors, routed through a chain of stealth satellites disguised as natural debris. They've split their fleet toward Mars, his intelligence officer reported. Sol Fleet Command sent the 3rd Yorscourt Squadron to intercept, but sir, 40 ships against 800 won't hold long. Chen studied the display, watching the battle unfold across the entire inner solar system. A war spread across millions of kilometers of space, tens of thousands of ships, hundreds of thousands of lives, and every single decision made under the crushing pressure of impossible odds. Sarah's doing exactly what we planned, Chen said quietly, more to himself than to his officer. She's bleeding, but she's not breaking. Threxus still thinks he's fighting 600 ships with nothing behind them. How much longer do we wait, Admiral? The officer asked. Chen's eyes moved to a separate display, one tracking the Zorath Armada's main reserve. Over 3,000 ships still held in formation behind the front lines. Threxus's true trump card, kept in reserve specifically in case anything unexpected occurred. We wait until he commits that reserve, Chen said, not before. If we move too early, he still has 3,000 fresh ships to throw at us the moment he realizes what's happening. We need him to believe the battle is already won, before we ever show him otherwise. It was a brutal mathematical kind of patience, one that required watching human ships die in real time, knowing the moment to strike had not yet come. Chen had spent 3 years preparing for this exact kind of decision, and it was somehow worse than he had ever imagined it would be, watching numbers scroll across a screen that represented real people, real crews, real lives, being spent as the price of a plan he had helped design. On the Endeavour, Sarah Cade watched her own tactical display with the same grim patience, 6 hours into a battle that had already cost her a third of her visible fleet, with no end yet in sight, and no way to know for certain that the moment Chen was waiting for would ever actually come in time to matter. Status report, she said quietly. Sol Fleet strength at 58%, Reyes reported. Zorath frontline strength at 89%. 3rd Escort Squadron reports heavy losses approaching Mars orbit, currently down to 22 ships. Sarah closed her eyes for one brief moment, allowing herself exactly that much time to feel the full weight of what those numbers meant, before opening them again, steady and clear. Continue the fight, she said. We hold as long as we can. Marcus will come. He has to. Above Earth, the battle raged on. Human ships burning and falling one by one, buying time with everything they had, waiting for a second fleet that remained silent and hidden. 412 ships in the freezing dark, watching, waiting, counting down toward the moment when overconfidence would finally become the Zorath Dominion's greatest weakness. Aboard the destroyer Meridian, Lieutenant Commander Jenna Okoro found herself in command of the ship after a plasma strike killed her captain and 2 other bridge officers outright. She had trained for exactly this possibility during years of command school, running simulations where a chain of command collapsed mid-battle, but living through it felt entirely different from any drill. Status report, she said, forcing her voice to stay level, despite the smoke still clearing from the bridge's shattered secondary console. Hull integrity at 60%, weapon systems at 70%. We've lost contact with engineering, replied the ship's tactical officer, a young ensign named Park, who looked barely old enough to be out of training, his face pale, but his hands steady on his console. Get me a line to engineering, any way you can, Jenna ordered. And somebody find out if Dr. Alvey is still alive down in Medical Bay 2. I want a casualty report within 5 minutes. The Meridian continued fighting, even as its chain of command rebuilt itself in real time, a ship held together as much by the discipline of its surviving crew as by its remaining hull plating. Jenna guided the vessel through a tight formation maneuver, using the ship's remaining weapons to support a nearby cruiser under heavy fire, buying that larger vessel enough time to disengage and fall back for repairs. Enemy cruiser destroyed, Park called out. A small note of disbelieving triumph crept into his voice, despite the chaos around them. Direct hit on their reactor core. Good work, Jenna said. Stay focused. We're not out of this yet. Not by a long way. Similar scenes of quiet, desperate heroism played out across the fleet in those early hours of battle. On the frigate Constant, a medical team worked through 3 consecutive hours of continuous casualties, treating burns and shrapnel wounds in a bay never designed to handle this volume of injury, prioritizing cases with a speed and calm that came only from years of emergency training, finally being tested under conditions no simulation could replicate. On the cruiser Solidarity, a young weapons officer named Marcus Webb, no relation to Vice Admiral Chen, kept the ship's point defense guns firing continuously for 6 hours straight, manually recalibrating targeting systems each time enemy fighters adjusted their approach vectors, preventing at least a dozen successful strikes against the ship's more vulnerable engine section through sheer, relentless attention to detail. Back on the Endeavour, Admiral Cade received an update that complicated the tactical picture further. Admiral, long-range scans show a group of civilian evacuation ships still attempting to leave the orbital shipyards near the moon, Reyes reported. They're directly in the projected path of the Zoreth advance. Sarah felt a fresh wave of tension settle into her already exhausted shoulders. How many ships, and how many people? 6 transport vessels, Admiral. Estimated 11,000 shipyard workers and their families who didn't make it to the evacuation window in time. It was a cruel irony that did not escape Sarah. 11,000 civilians caught in the path of an 11,000 ship armada, though the coincidence of the number offered no comfort at all. Divert the 3rd Cruiser Squadron to escort those transports clear, she ordered. I know it thins our line further, but I will not leave 11,000 civilians to die, because we needed every gun in formation. Understood, Admiral, Reyes said, relaying the order immediately. The 3rd Cruiser Squadron broke away from the main formation, 25 ships moving to shield the fleeing transports, drawing enemy fire away from the slower, unarmed civilian vessels. It was exactly the kind of decision that made Sarah's overall battle plan harder to execute cleanly, another variable in an already impossibly complex equation, but she had never once considered leaving those civilians behind, regardless of what it cost the broader strategy. The transports escaped successfully, though the 3rd Cruiser Squadron paid for it, losing 8 ships in the process of shepherding the civilians to safety behind Earth's planetary defense grid. Sarah accepted the report of those losses with the same grim resolve she had carried through every difficult decision of the past several hours, filing away the weight of it to be felt fully later, once there was time to feel anything at all. High Marshal Threxus, meanwhile, continued directing the main body of his armada with the calm, methodical patience of a commander who had conducted dozens of similar campaigns across his long career. He reviewed reports from his subordinate officers with careful attention, occasionally offering corrections to formation adjustments, but largely allowing the battle to unfold according to standard Dominion doctrine, overwhelming force, applied steadily, until resistance collapsed entirely. Their fleet continues fragmenting into smaller defensive actions, Vesk reported, diverting resources to protect civilian assets, splitting formations to respond to secondary threats. It is inefficient, Marshal. A more disciplined force would maintain a unified defensive line rather than scattering its strength this way. They value their civilian population highly, Threxus observed. This is not entirely surprising for a young species. Sentiment often outweighs strategic efficiency in early-stage civilizations. It will make the eventual occupation smoother, in truth. A population that has seen its military prioritize their protection, even at tactical cost, will be easier to govern than one that watched its leaders abandon it. Vesk said nothing further, though privately he found himself less certain than his commander that the human fleet's decisions reflected simple sentimentality rather than a more calculated set of priorities. He had noted, though he did not yet raise it directly with Threxus, that human losses, while steep, had remained remarkably consistent in their pattern, neither collapsing faster than expected, nor holding longer than seemed sustainable. It was the kind of consistency that, in Vesk's long experience, sometimes indicated a battle being managed rather than simply endured. He kept this observation to himself for the time being, uncertain whether it was worth raising against the confidence of a commander who had never once been wrong about the outcome of a major engagement in over 2 centuries of service to the Dominion. As the battle stretched past its 6th hour, Sarah Cade found herself reviewing casualty reports between tactical decisions, forcing herself to read each name rather than simply noting the aggregate numbers, believing that leaders who stopped seeing individual losses as individual losses had already lost something essential about command that could never fully be recovered. "Admiral," Reyes said quietly, noticing her attention on the casualty list rather than the tactical display. "You don't have to do that right now." "Yes, I do," Sarah said. "Every one of these names belongs to someone who trusted this fleet, trusted this plan, trusted me. I owe them the respect of knowing their names, even if I can't do anything else for them right now." Reyes did not argue further, understanding the particular kind of weight his admiral carried, a weight he suspected every commanding officer across the fleet was carrying in their own way during these long, brutal hours of battle. The fleet continued its fighting retreat toward the lunar perimeter, buying time with blood and wreckage, waiting for a signal from beyond Neptune that would either vindicate 3 years of secret preparation or arrive too late to matter at all. As the 9th hour of battle wore on, the retreat toward the lunar perimeter grew increasingly costly. The carrier Endurance, already weakened from earlier hangar fires, took a direct hit to its primary flight deck, grounding its remaining fighters mid-launch. Captain Owen Marsh, no relation to the president, made the difficult call to order his ship out of the main formation entirely, rather than risk it becoming a liability to the ships around it. "Falling back to secondary defensive position," he reported. "We can still provide long-range fire support, but we're done launching craft for now." "Copy that, Endurance," came the reply from Fleet Command. "Hold position and keep those guns working." Elsewhere, the frigate Constant, having spent hours treating a continuous stream of wounded, found itself directly targeted by a group of Zorath fighters who had broken away from the main engagement, apparently intent on eliminating what they correctly identified as a medical support vessel. Its escort, a lone destroyer called the Sentinel, placed itself directly between the incoming fighters and the Constant, absorbing damage that would otherwise have fallen on hundreds of wounded crew members receiving treatment. "Sentinel taking heavy fire," its captain reported, voice tight but controlled. "Continuing to hold position. Constant, get your wounded stabilized. We've got you covered." It was this kind of quiet, unglamorous sacrifice, repeated across dozens of ships throughout the fleet, that ultimately allowed the Sol Defense Fleet to survive as long as it did, not through any single dramatic maneuver, but through thousands of small decisions made by exhausted crews who refused to let the ships and people around them fall without a fight. By the time the 10th hour of battle arrived, Admiral Cade's fleet had been pushed to the very edge of what it could sustain, 300 ships holding a line that should, by any reasonable measure, have already collapsed. It held anyway, buying every last minute needed for a hidden fleet in the frozen dark beyond Neptune to finish its own final preparations before launch. Sarah walked the length of the Endeavor's bridge one more time, checking in quietly with each of her officers, saying little, but making sure her presence was felt at every station. It was a small thing, but she had learned over 30 years of service that steady presence mattered more in moments like this than any words she could offer. Her crew fought on, exhausted and afraid, but never once alone. By the 8th hour of battle, the Sol Defense Fleet had been pushed back to a defensive perimeter just beyond Earth's moon. Of the original 640 ships, only 380 remained combat effective. The 3rd Escort Squadron at Mars had been reduced to 9 ships, still fighting, still refusing to break, buying every extra minute they could for the evacuation ships lifting off from the Martian surface toward deep shelters carved into the planet's northern ice caps. Admiral Sarah Cade stood on the bridge of the Endeavor, her uniform stained with sweat, her eyes red from hours without rest, watching the battle she had spent years preparing to fight finally reach its breaking point. Admiral, Reyes said, his voice hoarse. Command wants to know if we should pull back to a tighter formation around Earth itself. No, Sarah said immediately. If we collapse to Earth, we lose the ability to maneuver. We hold the line at the moon. It's the last position where we still have room to fight. She did not say the other reason out loud, though everyone on the bridge understood it without needing to hear it. The moon was also the closest position from which Fleet Hydra could arrive without being detected too early by the main Zorath sensor net. Every kilometer closer to Earth that the battle moved made Chen's eventual arrival more dangerous, more exposed, more likely to fail. On the Devastation's crown, High Marshal Threxus watched the human retreat toward the moon with growing satisfaction, though a small, nagging doubt had begun to form, somewhere in the back of his mind, the kind of doubt that came from decades of experience conquering dozens of worlds across the galaxy. Something troubles me, he said to Vesk. Marshal. Their resistance, Threxus said slowly. It is too organized, too disciplined for a species we assessed as having only recently developed interstellar capability. Look at their formations, Vesk. Look at how they fall back. This is not the behavior of a species fighting blindly for survival. This is the behavior of a fleet executing a plan. Vesk considered this carefully before responding. Perhaps they simply trained well, Marshal. Their intelligence reports do describe a species with a long history of warfare among themselves. It is possible they simply understand tactics better than we expected. Perhaps, Threxus said, though the doubt did not fully leave him. Increased sensor sweeps across the outer solar system. I want confirmation that there are no additional forces we have failed to account for. It was the first crack in Threxal's confidence. Small, almost imperceptible, but real. Word of the increased sensor sweeps reached Fleet Hydra within minutes, relayed through the same stealth satellite network that had kept Chen informed throughout the battle. Admiral, they're increasing long-range scans, his sensor officer reported. Nothing has picked us up yet, but if they extend their sweep radius another 20%, our position becomes vulnerable. Chen studied the readouts carefully. This was the danger point in the entire plan, the moment where patience and risk began to pull against each other with equal force. Wait too long, and Hydra risked discovery before it could strike with full surprise. Move too early, and Threxus still had 3,000 reserve ships to counter with, more than enough to turn Hydra's surprise attack into a second slaughter. How much longer until they commit their reserve fleet? Chen asked. Based on current battle projections, if Sol Fleet holds the moon perimeter, Zorath Command will likely commit reserves within the next 4 hours to finish the engagement decisively, the officer replied. But sir, if their sensor sweeps expand before then, we may be discovered first. Chen made his decision the way he had made every difficult decision over the past 3 years, by weighing the cost of every option against the cost of doing nothing, and choosing the path most likely to save the most lives in the long run, even when every option carried terrible risk. We hold position 2 more hours, Chen said. No longer. If their sensors haven't found us by then, and if Sarah's fleet is still holding, we move on my mark regardless of whether the reserve fleet has committed. We cannot let discovery force our hand at the worst possible moment. Back at the lunar perimeter, the battle had entered its most desperate phase. Sarah's remaining ships fought with a kind of exhausted, stubborn fury, crews running on stimulants and adrenaline, damage control teams working in shifts too short to be called rest, weapons systems firing until they overheated and had to be manually cooled by crew members risking their own safety to keep their ships in the fight. The heavy cruiser Resolute took a direct hit to its main reactor housing, triggering a cascade failure that its engineering crew fought desperately to contain. Chief Engineer Priya Nandakumar led a team of 6 people directly into the reactor chamber, sealed in radiation suits, manually rerouting coolant systems while alarms screamed around them. Reactor stabilizing, she called out over comms, her voice strained with effort. We've got maybe 40 more minutes before we need a full shutdown for repairs. Understood. Keep her running as long as you safely can, came the reply from the Resolute's captain. We need every gun we have. 40 minutes. It was such a small amount of time, and yet it represented an eternity of risk for 6 people standing next to an unstable reactor, doing dangerous, unglamorous work that would never make it into any history book. Work that mattered just as much as anything happening on the front lines of the battle itself. Across the fleet, similar stories played out on ship after ship. A young lieutenant on the destroyer Meridian took over as acting captain after her commanding officer was wounded, coordinating the ship's defense with a calm clarity that surprised even herself. A repair crew on the carrier Endurance worked through a fire in the main hangar bay, wearing nothing but standard uniforms because there hadn't been time to don full protective gear, saving 3 fighters that would fly again within the hour. None of these people had been told the full truth about Fleet Hydra. Most of them believed, quite reasonably, that they were fighting and possibly dying in a battle humanity could not win. They fought anyway, because giving up had never been a real option in their minds, whether or not a secret fleet existed somewhere in the dark. At the 10-hour mark, High Marshal Threxus received the report he had been waiting for, regarding his expanded sensor sweep. "Nothing, Marshal," his sensor chief reported. "No additional human forces detected anywhere within extended scan range. The outer solar system remains clear." The report should have been reassuring. Instead, Threxus found himself staring at the tactical display for a long moment before responding. "Extend the sweep further," he said. "Full range, including the trans-Neptunian region." "Marshal, that region is largely empty space and minor icy bodies. It would take considerable sensor resources to conduct a full sweep. Resources currently allocated to tracking the ongoing engagement." Threxus considered this. His instincts, honed over 200 years of conquest across dozens of star systems, told him something was wrong, that a species capable of this level of disciplined resistance was unlikely to have committed everything it had to a battle it must have known. On paper, it could not win. But instincts were not proof, and proof was what his superiors within the Dominion demanded before resources were diverted from an already successful campaign. "Belay that order," Threxus said finally, the decision costing him more uncertainty than he cared to admit. "Continue standard sweep protocols. Commit the second wave of reserve ships to close the engagement. I want this battle concluded within the next 3 hours." It was the decision Chen and Cade had spent 3 years hoping for, a commander so confident in overwhelming numerical superiority that he chose efficiency over caution, at exactly the moment caution would have mattered most. Word of the reserve fleet's deployment reached both Sarah Cade and Marcus Chen within minutes of each other. On the Endeavor, Reyes delivered the news with a mixture of dread and something that might have been hope. "Admiral, Zorath Reserve Fleet is moving. Estimated 1,500 additional ships joining the main engagement." Sarah felt the weight of the number settle over her like a physical thing. 1,500 more ships, on top of the thousands already grinding down her remaining 380 vessels. It was, by any reasonable measure, the end of the battle, the moment where the last human defenses would finally be overwhelmed. But she also knew, with a certainty that steadied her hands despite everything, exactly what this moment meant for the plan. "Get me Vice Admiral Chen," she said. The connection opened almost instantly, as though Chen had been waiting for the call. "I know," he said, before Sarah could speak. "We're tracking it too. Sarah, how long can you hold?" Sarah looked at the tactical display, at the thinning red line of her own fleet, at the overwhelming mass of alien ships now bearing down with renewed force. "Not long, Marcus. Maybe an hour before we start losing whole squadrons instead of individual ships." "Then we move now," Chen said. "Full deployment. All 412 ships. Sarah, I need you to hold that line for 20 more minutes. That's all I'm asking. 20 minutes, and then everything changes." Sarah closed her eyes for one brief moment, thinking of every crew member across her fleet who had already given everything they had, and everyone who was about to be asked to give just a little more. 20 minutes, she said. "We'll hold. Go, Marcus. Show them what Earth's been hiding." Deep beyond Neptune, inside the carved-out chamber within the dwarf planet Orcus, engines that had remained silent and cold for 3 years began, at last, to roar to life. In the 2 hours before that moment, however, the battle at the lunar perimeter had continued to grind down both fleets in ways that tested the limits of every crew still fighting. On the heavy cruiser Perseverance, Captain Adaeze Nwosu made a decision that would later be studied in fleet academies for years to come, ordering her badly damaged ship directly into the path of a Zorath capital vessel's weapons barrage to shield 2 smaller, more vulnerable frigates retreating behind her. "Captain, that maneuver will expose our reactor housing directly to their fire," her tactical officer warned. "I'm aware," Nuosu said. "Do it anyway. Those frigates have 300 people between them, mostly new recruits on their first deployment. We can take this hit better than they can." The Perseverance absorbed the full force of the barrage, its shields failing within seconds, hull plating tearing away in the vacuum of space, but it held together long enough for the two frigates to escape to a safer position within the fleet's reforming line. Nuosu's ship would ultimately be lost less than 20 minutes later, but her final order became one of the defining stories that survivors of the battle would carry with them for the rest of their lives, retold in fleet messes and academy lecture halls for a generation afterward. Elsewhere along the line, Dr. Amara Whitfield, chief medical officer aboard the hospital ship Sanctuary, coordinated the treatment of wounded crew members, transferred from a dozen different vessels, working with a small army of nurses and medical technicians, to keep pace with casualties arriving faster than any peacetime training had prepared them for. "We're running low on synthetic blood plasma," one of her nurses reported, exhaustion evident in every word. "At this rate, we'll be out within the hour." "Then we prioritize," Whitfield said, her voice steady, despite the impossible weight of the decision she was being asked to make. "Triage Protocol Delta. Save who we can save. I know how hard that is." "I know exactly how hard that is. Do it anyway." The Sanctuary continued its grim, essential work throughout the battle, a small island of desperate mercy amid the chaos of combat, saving hundreds of lives that would otherwise have been lost to wounds that, under ordinary circumstances, would never have been survivable without immediate and complete medical resources. On the devastation's crown, High Marshal Threxus continued to wrestle with the nagging uncertainty that had begun to take root in his mind, despite his outward confidence. He called for a private consultation with his intelligence chief, an older Zorath officer named Karnath, who had served in the Dominion's Strategic Assessment Corps for nearly 150 years. "Karnath, tell me honestly," Threxus said, "have you ever seen a species fight this way before? This disciplined, this coordinated, in their first major engagement against Dominion forces?" Karnath considered the question with the careful deliberation that had made him valuable to 3 successive Dominion fleet commanders over his long career. "Once, Marshal. Nearly 100 years ago, during the Velkoth campaign, their fleet fought with unusual discipline in its opening engagements as well. We later learned they had been preparing defensive strategies for over a decade before we arrived, based on intelligence gathered from earlier scout contact." Threxus absorbed this information slowly. "And did the Velkoth possess any hidden reserve forces during that campaign?" "They did not, as it turned out," Karnath said. "Though I understand your concern, Marshal, it is not baseless. Humanity's scout contact with our forces occurred 18 months prior to this Armada's arrival. That is more than enough time for a technologically capable species to construct additional defensive assets, particularly if their scientific development has progressed as rapidly as some of our preliminary reports suggested." "Then why do my sensor sweeps show nothing?" Threxus asked, frustration creeping into his usually controlled voice. "Because if such a fleet exists, Marshal, it would need to be hidden somewhere. Our standard sweep protocols would not naturally cover," Karnath said. "The outer solar system contains dozens of minor bodies capable of masking a fleet's signature. If a species possessed the engineering sophistication to construct such a hiding place, it would be unusual, but not impossible." Threxus was quiet for a long moment, staring at the tactical display showing his forces slowly, methodically grinding down the remaining Sol Defense Fleet ships. "Prepare a contingency alert for all reserve elements," he said finally. "If anything unusual appears on our sensors, I want an immediate response capability, not a delayed one. I will not be caught unprepared by an enemy I have already underestimated once today." It was, in hindsight, the closest Threxus ever came to correctly anticipating the danger that awaited him. But even this measure of caution proved insufficient against a fleet that had spent 3 years designing itself specifically to defeat exactly this kind of defensive preparation. Back aboard the Endeavour, Sarah Cade received word of the Perseverance's sacrifice with the same heavy grief she carried for every loss, filing the story away to be honored properly once there was time for proper honors, focusing instead on the immediate tactical necessity of holding her line for the final crucial minutes, before Chen's fleet would arrive. "Admiral, we're down to 290 effective combat ships," Reyes reported, his voice hoarse from hours of continuous operation. Enemy reserve fleet is 15 minutes from full engagement range. How long until Fleet Hydra arrives? Sarah asked. Vice Admiral Chen's last update suggested approximately 18 minutes from launch to arrival. Admiral, they should be underway by now. Sarah did the math in her head, the same grim calculation she had been running continuously for the past several hours. 15 minutes until the Zorath reserve fleet fully engaged. 18 minutes until Fleet Hydra arrived. A gap of 3 minutes that could mean the difference between a coordinated counterattack and a fleet too badly broken to capitalize on Hydra's arrival at all. All ships, she said, opening a fleet-wide channel, her voice carrying a weight that every exhausted crew member across the remaining Sol defense fleet could feel, even through the strain of continuous battle. I know what I'm asking. I know how much you've already given. I need 3 more minutes. Just 3. Hold the line. Help is coming. Across 290 battered burning ships, crews who had been fighting for over 10 hours without meaningful rest found something in themselves to give just a little more. Weapons crews forcing overheated systems to fire past their safety thresholds. Engineering teams rerouting power from non-essential systems to keep shields online for just a few more critical minutes. Pilots pushing damaged fighters back into formation, despite injuries that would have grounded them under any other circumstances. 3 minutes. It did not sound like much. It would feel, to everyone who lived through it, like the longest 3 minutes of their lives. On the destroyer Meridian, Lieutenant Commander Jenna Okoro heard Sarah's message over the fleet-wide channel and felt something steady settle over her, despite the exhaustion pulling at every part of her body. You heard the Admiral, she said to her crew. 3 minutes. We've given 10 hours already. We can give 3 more. Around the bridge, her crew nodded, some too tired to speak, others managing tight, determined smiles. Ensign Park adjusted the Meridian's remaining weapons array, redirecting power from a damaged secondary system to keep the ship's main guns firing at full capacity for whatever time remained. On the frigate Constant, Dr. Amara Whitfield received word of the message through the ship's intercom system, pausing for just a moment amid the chaos of her medical bay to say a quiet word of thanks to whatever forces had allowed her patients this much time to survive. Then she returned to her work, treating the next wounded crew member carried through her doors, because 3 minutes for the fleet meant 3 more minutes to save lives that would otherwise be lost. High Marshal Threxus, still unaware of what those 3 minutes truly meant, continued directing his reserve fleet's final approach with methodical confidence, his earlier uncertainty pushed aside by the overwhelming visual evidence of a human fleet, reduced to a fraction of its original strength, clearly moments from total collapse. Reserve fleet will reach optimal engagement range in 90 seconds, Vesk reported. Good, Threxus said. Let us finish what we came here to do. He did not know that 90 seconds from that moment, 412 ships that had spent 3 years hidden in the frozen dark beyond Neptune would cross the final distance to Earth, arriving at exactly the moment his own reserve fleet committed fully to the attack, exactly the moment 3 years of careful planning had been designed to exploit. Across the Sol defense fleet, the final seconds of that desperate 3-minute wait stretched on, every crew member holding their position, every ship still firing despite damage that should have forced retreat hours earlier, all of them trusting in a plan most of them had never been told the full details of, trusting simply in the belief that their commanders had not asked them to hold this line for nothing. Then, across 100 different bridges and 1,000 different sensor stations, the first readings began to arrive. Unknown contacts, moving at extraordinary speed, closing fast from the direction of the outer solar system. Fleet Hydra had arrived, inside the command chamber of the Prometheus. Vice Admiral Marcus Chen gripped the edge of his console as the entire ship shuddered, with the force of its engines coming online after 3 years of near-total silence. Around him, 411 other ships, hidden inside and around the frozen shell of Orcus, began the same process. A fleet waking from hibernation all at once, a sound and a feeling that no simulation had ever fully captured. All ships report engine ignition successful, his communications officer said, her voice tight with the same nervous energy gripping everyone on the bridge. Fleet Hydra is ready to move on your order. Admiral. Chen looked at the tactical display one final time. Sarah's fleet, reduced now to barely 300 ships, was holding a desperate line against nearly 13,000 Zorath vessels, buying the last few minutes Fleet Hydra needed to cross the vast distance from Orcus to Earth's orbital defense zone. "All ships, this is Vice Admiral Chen," he said, his voice carried across every vessel in the fleet through a tight beam communication network, designed specifically to avoid detection until the last possible moment. 3 years ago, we were asked to build something the galaxy has never seen, in secret, in the dark, without recognition, without glory. Today, that secret becomes humanity's answer to an armada that believes it has already won. Our people are dying above Earth right now, buying us the time to reach them. We will not waste a single second of what they've given us. Fleet Hydra, engage main thrusters, set course for Earth, maximum burn. 412 ships surged forward from the darkness beyond Neptune, accelerating at speeds that would have torn apart older human spacecraft, made possible by propulsion technology developed using reverse-engineered Zorath components combined with human engineering ingenuity, refined over 3 years of secret work. The fleet would cross the distance to Earth in under 15 minutes, arriving at a velocity that gave them a critical tactical advantage. They would strike the rear and flanks of the Zorath Armada before any alien sensor operator could fully process what was happening. On the Endeavor, Sarah Cade watched her own tactical display with grim focus as the Zorath Reserve Fleet closed the final distance toward her remaining ships. "Admiral, we're taking heavy fire across the entire line," Reyes reported. "Meridian and Endurance report critical damage. We're being pushed back toward Earth orbit." "Hold the line," Sarah said, her voice carrying across the fleet-wide channel with a calm authority that steadied nerves across 300 ships. "Everyone, hold. Just a little longer." She did not know exactly how much longer a little would be. Chen had asked for 20 minutes, and 18 had already passed in a blur of explosions, damage reports, and desperate maneuvering. If Fleet Hydra did not arrive soon, there would be nothing left of the Sol defense fleet to save, and nothing left standing between the Zorath Armada and Earth itself. On the Devastation's crown, High Marshal Threxus watched the collapsing human formation with the satisfaction of a commander who believed his victory was finally, fully secured. "Their line is breaking," Vesk reported. "Estimated full collapse within the next 10 to 15 minutes. "Good," Threxus said. "Prepare the ground forces for planetary approach. I want the first occupation teams ready to move the moment orbital control is secured." It was at that exact moment, as Threxus began planning the details of Earth's occupation, that his sensor chief's voice cut through the bridge with an urgency that made every officer present turn toward the display. "Marshal, massive energy signatures detected, bearing from the outer system. Unknown fleet, estimated 400 vessels, closing at extreme velocity." Threxus turned sharply toward the display, watching as a new formation of ships materialized on his tactical readout, moving faster than anything his sensors had cataloged from human vessels during the entire battle. "Impossible," he said quietly. "Identify their point of origin." "Trans-Neptunian space, Marshal. They were hidden. We had no detection of their presence at any point during this engagement." For the first time in the entire campaign, High Marshal Threxus felt something he had not felt in over 200 years of conquest. Genuine, cold uncertainty. "Redirect reserve elements to intercept," he ordered, his voice sharper now, urgency replacing his earlier calm confidence. "I want full sensor lock on that formation immediately." But 400 was already too small a number to matter to his overall calculations, and that misjudgment, born from decades of easy victories against species far weaker than his own, would prove to be the most costly mistake of his career. Fleet Hydra struck the rear flank of the Zorath Armada like a hammer falling on glass. Human ships, built and refined over 3 years using technology the Dominion did not know existed, opened fire with weapon systems specifically designed to counter Zorath shield frequencies, systems developed from painstaking analysis of debris recovered from the earlier skirmish that had given humanity its critical technological edge. Zorath cruisers that had spent the entire battle focused forward, engaging Sarah's diminished fleet, found themselves suddenly exposed from behind, their rear shields far weaker than their forward defenses, built for a species that had never once, in centuries of conquest, faced an enemy capable of executing a surprise flank attack of this scale. Direct hits across the enemy rear formation, Chen's tactical officer reported, barely able to keep the disbelief out of her voice as damage reports flooded in. Their shields aren't holding, Admiral. We're punching straight through. Continue the assault, Chen ordered. Concentrate fire on their capital ships. Don't let them regroup. Zorath ships, caught completely off guard, began breaking formation in confusion, some turning to face the new threat, others continuing to press forward against Sarah's fleet, uncertain which danger demanded their immediate attention. The chaos that followed was exactly what Chen and Cade had spent 3 years planning for. An enemy fleet, moments from total victory, suddenly thrown into disarray by an attack it had never once considered possible. On the Endeavor, Sarah watched the tactical display shift in real time as Fleet Hydra tore through the Zorath rear formation. Admiral, Zorath forces are breaking off from our position, Reyes reported, disbelief evident in his voice. They're redirecting to counter the new threat. That's our opening, Sarah said, feeling something like hope rise in her chest for the first time in hours. All remaining Sol Fleet ships, this is Admiral Cade. Fleet Hydra has arrived. Reform your lines. We push forward, now, while they're still reeling. 300 battered Sol Fleet ships, crews exhausted but suddenly reinvigorated by the sight of reinforcements arriving from nowhere, surged forward to meet the confused Zorath formation from the front, while Fleet Hydra continued to tear through their rear and flanks. Caught between two coordinated forces, the once overwhelming Zorath Armada began to fracture into isolated groups, unable to maintain the disciplined formation that had made their numerical advantage so devastating. High Marshal Threxus, watching his carefully constructed victory dissolve into chaos in a matter of minutes, made a decision that would define the rest of the battle. Full reserve commitment, he ordered, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. Every remaining ship, engage the new formation. I want that fleet destroyed. But the order came too late to matter as much as it might have earlier in the battle. Fleet Hydra's ships, moving at speeds Zorath weapons systems struggled to track, wove through the chaotic formation with devastating precision, targeting command ships and capital vessels first, exactly as 3 years of wargaming had determined would cause the most damage to Zorath fleet cohesion. The battle raged for another 2 hours, brutal and costly on both sides. Fleet Hydra lost 89 ships in the fighting, a devastating toll that Chen felt with every single loss reported to him. Sol Defense Fleet lost another 40 of its already diminished 300 vessels, crews who had held the line through the entire battle, only to fall in its final hours. But the Zorath Armada, caught between two forces and unable to reform its shattered discipline, suffered losses far beyond anything Threxus had ever experienced in 2 centuries of conquest. Marshal, our forces are at 40% effective strength and falling, Vesk reported, his voice carrying the shock of an officer watching an unbreakable certainty crumble in real time. Recommend immediate withdrawal. Threxus stared at the tactical display for a long moment, watching ships that represented decades of Dominion resources burning across Earth's orbital space, destroyed by a species his own intelligence reports had assessed as barely capable of interstellar travel. How, he said quietly, did we not know? Nobody on his bridge had an answer for him. Sound the withdrawal, Threxus said finally, the words costing him something he would never fully recover from. All remaining forces, fall back to Rally Point Theta. We are leaving this system. Across what remained of the Zorath Armada, thousands of surviving ships began a desperate retreat, pursued by the combined force of Sol Defense Fleet and Fleet Hydra, harried at every opportunity as they fled toward the outer solar system and beyond, back toward Dominion space, carrying with them the first true defeat their empire had suffered in over 200 years of expansion. On the bridge of the Endeavor, Sarah Cade watched the retreating alien formation, with an exhaustion so complete it felt like something physical pressing down on her shoulders. Admiral, Reyes said quietly, they're leaving. They're actually leaving. Sarah did not answer immediately. She looked at the tactical display, at the wreckage scattered across Earth's orbital space, human and alien debris mixed together in the silent dark, a testament to everything both sides had lost in the past 12 hours. Get me Vice Admiral Chen, she said finally. The connection opened, and for a moment, neither officer spoke, both simply looking at each other through the video feed, exhaustion and disbelief, and something like relief passing between them without needing words. We held, Sarah said finally. We held, Chen agreed. Sarah, I am so sorry it cost what it cost. I know, she said quietly. But it's over. For now, at least, it's over. Above Earth, the last Zorath ships disappeared into the dark of deep space, leaving behind a solar system scarred by battle, a human fleet battered but victorious, and a galaxy that would soon learn that Earth was not the easy conquest it had once appeared to be. In the chaotic minutes just after Fleet Hydra's arrival, Captain Diego Alvarez found himself flying escort for one of Chen's capital ships, a heavy cruiser called the Vanguard, as it pushed deep into the fractured Zorath formation. His fighter squadron, reduced to less than half its original strength after hours of continuous combat, provided point defense cover against the swarms of alien fighters still attempting to regroup amid the chaos. Falcon, we've got 3 bandits closing on the Vanguard's port side, Priya OCE called over comms, her voice tight with the strain of hour after hour of combat flying. On it, Diego said, banking his fighter hard and diving toward the incoming threats. His hands moved with the exhausted precision of a pilot running purely on training and adrenaline at this point, reflexes doing the work his conscious mind was too tired to fully direct. He destroyed one enemy fighter with a precise burst of cannon fire and forced the other 2 into a defensive maneuver that gave the Vanguard's point defense guns a clean shot to finish them off. Nice work, Falcon, came the acknowledgement from the Vanguard's tactical officer. Just doing the job, Diego replied, though privately he felt something close to disbelief that he was still alive to do it, after everything his squadron had endured since the battle began. Elsewhere in the fighting, Chief Engineer Priya Nandakumar aboard the Resolute finally received the order to shut down the ship's reactor for emergency repairs, having kept it running nearly 20 minutes past what her team had initially estimated as safe operating limits. Reactor secure, she reported, her voice trembling with exhaustion as she finally allowed herself to sit down on the deck of the engineering bay, her radiation suit streaked with grime and sweat. We held her together. We actually held her together. Around her, the small team that had worked alongside her through the worst of the battle shared exhausted, disbelieving smiles, the kind of shared relief that comes only after surviving something that, for hours, had seemed impossible to survive. On the Prometheus, Vice Admiral Chen watched the battle's final phase unfold with the particular kind of exhaustion that came from holding responsibility for thousands of lives across 2 fleets simultaneously. His communications officer delivered updates in a steady stream, each one a small piece of a battle too large and too chaotic for any single person to fully comprehend in real time. Admiral, Zorath forces are in full retreat across all sectors, she reported. Estimated 85% of their remaining fleet is now attempting withdrawal toward the outer solar system. Order our forces to harass their retreat, but do not pursue beyond the outer marker, Chen said. I want them to leave, not to feel cornered into a desperate last stand. A wounded predator with nothing left to lose is far more dangerous than one that still believes retreat is a viable option. It was a decision born from years of careful strategic study, understanding that total annihilation of the retreating force, while tactically tempting after the losses Earth had suffered, carried its own risks. A Dominion armada with no path to retreat might choose instead to turn its remaining, dwindling firepower toward Earth itself, in one final, desperate act of destruction, rather than accept complete defeat. Understood, Admiral, his communications officer said, relaying the order across the fleet. Fleet Hydra's ships adjusted their engagement pattern accordingly, continuing to inflict losses on the retreating Zorath formation, while deliberately leaving clear paths of withdrawal open, herding the fleeing armada toward the edge of the solar system, rather than boxing it into a corner with no options remaining. Aboard the Devastation's Crown, High Marshal Threxus watched the withdrawal of his once mighty armada with an expression that his officers had never before seen on their commander's face, something close to genuine defeat. Casualty assessment, he said quietly. 9,740 vessels destroyed or disabled beyond repair, Marshal, Carneth reported, his voice equally subdued. Approximately 1,100 vessels remain combat-capable, currently withdrawing toward Dominion space. Threxus absorbed the number slowly, feeling the full weight of it settle over him. In over 200 years of service to the Dominion, across dozens of successful campaigns spanning a significant portion of the galaxy's outer arm. He had never once presided over a defeat of this magnitude. "How will I explain this to the High Council?" he said, more to himself than to anyone else on the bridge. "With honesty, Marshal," Carneth said carefully. "We encountered a species with capabilities far beyond our initial assessment. That is not a failure of courage or strategy on your part. It is a failure of intelligence gathering, one that occurred long before this engagement began. The High Council rarely distinguishes between those two kinds of failure," Threxus said grimly. "But you are right, that the explanation must be honest. I will not compound this defeat with false reassurances about a species we now know to be far more dangerous than we understood." He turned his gaze one final time toward the small, distant blue planet receding behind them, as his flagship began its own withdrawal. "Mark this system, Carneth. Mark it clearly, in every strategic assessment the Dominion produces from this day forward. Humanity is not the easy conquest our scouts once reported. Whoever faces them next must understand that, or they will share our fate today." The Zorath Armada withdrew fully from the solar system over the following 6 hours, harried at every stage by fleet hydras continuing patrols, leaving behind a battlefield scattered with wreckage from both sides, a testament to the true cost of the victory Earth had won. Back on Earth, the news of the retreat spread with a speed that outpaced even the most modern communication networks, as people who had spent days huddled in shelters and staring at increasingly grim news broadcasts finally received word that the alien fleet was leaving. In Denver, Mia Cade heard the announcement over the shelter's speaker system and felt a wave of relief so overwhelming that she found herself crying before she even fully understood why. "They're leaving," Devon said beside her, his voice barely a whisper, as though saying it too loudly might somehow make it untrue. "They're actually leaving." Around the shelter, hundreds of people who had spent days in fear erupted into a strange mixture of cheering and quiet, exhausted tears, the particular kind of emotional release that comes only after surviving something that had felt, for days, entirely unsurvivable. Mia held her mother's photograph a little tighter, hoping desperately that wherever Sarah was right now, she was safe, and that she would come home soon to tell her daughter everything that had happened above the sky, that had, for the first time in nearly a week, gone quiet. Aboard the Endeavour, in the hours after the retreat, Admiral Sarah Cade finally allowed herself a moment to sit down, her body suddenly aware of just how many hours had passed since she had last rested. Reyes brought her a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold, and she drank it anyway, grateful simply for something warm in her hands. "We held," Reyes said quietly, echoing the words from earlier in the battle, though this time they carried a different weight entirely, a sense of finality rather than desperate hope. "We held," Sarah agreed. "Get me the full casualty report, Reyes, every name. I want to know exactly what this cost us before I report to Earth Command." "Admiral, you've been awake for over 16 hours. The report can wait until—" "It can't," Sarah said, not unkindly, but firmly. "Every hour we wait is an hour some family doesn't know what happened to someone they love. Get me the report." Reyes nodded and left to compile the data, understanding that his admiral's exhaustion would not override her sense of duty to the people who had trusted her with their lives that day. Sarah sat alone for a few quiet minutes, watching the tactical display slowly clear of the chaotic clutter of battle, replaced instead by the calm, steady positions of a fleet finally at rest. She thought of Marcus Chen, likely just as exhausted aboard the Prometheus, and of the 412 ships that had emerged from 3 years of secrecy to save everything she had fought to protect. She thought of the crews of the Perseverance, the Sentinel, the 3rd Escort Squadron at Mars, and countless others who would never sit down for a quiet cup of coffee again. The victory, when it finally came, did not feel like triumph. It felt like grief, carefully held alongside something that might, in time, become relief. For now, Sarah simply sat with both feelings, allowing herself, for just a few minutes, to feel the full weight of everything the day had cost, before rising again, to do the work that still remained. In the days after the battle, Earth looked up at a sky that was, for the first time in nearly a week, empty of alien ships. It did not feel like victory to most people at first. It felt like the strange, heavy silence that follows a storm, when the wind stops but the damage remains, scattered and waiting to be counted. The counting took weeks. 9,740 Zorath ships had been destroyed or disabled during the battle and subsequent retreat, a number so large it would take Dominion historians decades to fully process what had happened to their once unstoppable Third Armada. On the human side, the losses were smaller in raw numbers but devastating in weight. 230 Sol Defense Fleet ships destroyed, 89 Fleet Hydra ships lost. Just over 40,000 human lives given in defense of a planet that most of its population had spent the battle believing might not survive the week. Admiral Sarah Cade stood before a memorial wall in Geneva 3 weeks after the battle, a temporary structure that would later be replaced by something permanent, listing the names of every crew member lost defending Earth's orbital space. She had insisted the wall include Fleet Hydra's dead as well, refusing any classification that would keep their sacrifice secret, even after the need for secrecy had ended. "You did good work, Admiral," said President Marsh, standing beside her, her own eyes fixed on the long list of names. "We lost 40,000 people," Sarah said quietly. "It doesn't feel like good work. It feels like the least bad option we had." "Sometimes that's what good work looks like," Marsh said. "I've read the reports. I know how close it came. I know what would have happened if Hydra hadn't been ready, if you hadn't held that line, if Threxus had waited even another hour before committing his reserves. We were closer to losing everything than most people will ever understand." Sarah nodded slowly. She had spent 3 sleepless weeks reviewing every decision made during the battle, second-guessing choices that had cost lives, wondering about paths not taken. It was a kind of grief that came with command, one she suspected never fully faded no matter how much time passed. "What happens now?" she asked. "Do we know if they're coming back?" "Command believes it will take them time," Marsh said. "Vice Admiral Chen's analysis suggests the Zorath Dominion will need to reassess everything they thought they knew about us before committing to another campaign. That gives us time. Whether it's enough time depends on what we do with it." Marcus Chen joined them a moment later, having just returned from a debrief with Earth Defense Command about the technical performance of Fleet Hydra's ships during the engagement. He looked older than he had 3 weeks earlier, the weight of the losses under his command visible in the new lines around his eyes. "Marcus," Sarah said, "how's the fleet?" "Repairing," he said. "We lost more ships than I'd hoped, but the technology performed better than even our most optimistic projections. The Dominion has no idea what hit them, and that ignorance is worth more to us right now than almost anything else we gained from this battle." "What do you mean?" Marsh asked. "I mean they still don't know how we built what we built, or how many more we might have," Chen said. Threxus reported back to his superiors that he encountered an unexpectedly capable defensive force. He doesn't know the full scope of Fleet Hydra's capabilities, because we never let him see it fully deployed at maximum capacity. That uncertainty buys us time to build more, to prepare better, to make sure that if they do come back, we're not relying on a single hidden fleet and a desperate gamble. Sarah looked out at the memorial wall again, at the names stretching across its surface, and thought about the strange, terrible bargain that had bought humanity its survival. 640 ships that fought and bled to buy 20 minutes. 412 ships built in secret over 3 years, hidden in the coldest, darkest part of the solar system, waiting for a moment none of their crews had truly believed would come until it did. "We can't do this again," she said quietly. "Not like this. Not relying on one hidden fleet and one desperate plan." "I agree," Chen said, "which is why Command has already approved the next phase. Full integration of Fleet Hydra's technology into standard fleet production. No more hiding half our strength in the dark. We build openly, we build faster, and we build smarter, using everything we learned from this battle." "And if the Dominion comes back before we're ready?" Marsh asked. "Then we fight with everything we have," Sarah said. "The same as we always have. But this time, the whole galaxy will know exactly what Earth is capable of before they ever decide to test us again." 6 months later, the reconstructed Sol Defense Fleet numbered 900 ships, each one built using lessons learned from Fleet Hydra's successful engineering and Sol Fleet's hard-won combat experience. Shipyards across Earth, Mars, and the asteroid belt worked around the clock, producing vessels at a pace that would have seemed impossible just a year earlier. The secrecy that had once been necessary to survive an unknown threat had given way to something new, a determined, open effort to make sure Earth would never again face annihilation, while hoping a hidden trump card would be enough to save it. Admiral Sarah Cade stood on the bridge of a new flagship, the ISS Resilience, named in honor of the crews who had held the line during those desperate first hours of battle. Marcus Chen had accepted a new position as head of fleet development, overseeing the integration of Hydra's technology across the entire defense force, no longer needing to hide in the cold dark beyond Neptune, now working openly alongside the officers and engineers who had once known nothing about his secret command. News of the battle had spread far beyond Earth's solar system by then, carried outward through the same interstellar communication networks the Zorath Dominion itself used, reaching other species, other worlds, some of whom had lived under Dominion rule for generations, never once believing resistance was possible against a power that had conquered dozens of star systems without serious challenge. A small delegation arrived at Earth 8 months after the battle, representatives from a species called the Velic, whose homeworld had been under Dominion control for nearly a century. Their lead diplomat, an elder named Austin, addressed President Marsh and a gathering of Earth's leadership with careful, measured words, translated through newly developed communication technology. "We did not believe it was possible," Austin said. "No species has resisted the Dominion successfully in living memory. Your world has done what we believed could not be done. We come not as conquerors, nor as simple admirers, but as a people who have begun, for the first time in a century, to imagine a future where the Dominion does not decide everything for us." President Marsh considered her response carefully, aware of the weight such words carried, aware that Earth's actions had changed something far larger than its own fate. "We didn't set out to be a symbol for anyone," she said honestly. "We set out to survive. But if what we did gives other people hope that they can survive too, then perhaps that's worth something beyond just our own safety." The Velic delegation stayed for 3 weeks, exchanging information, forming the first tentative agreements of what would eventually become a loose alliance of species resisting Dominion expansion, an alliance built not from military conquest, but from the simple, stubborn example of a small, young species that had refused to give up when the odds said it should. Admiral Sarah Cade visited the Geneva Memorial one final time before returning to active fleet duty, standing quietly before the wall of names that had grown slightly longer as families continued to submit records of those lost in ships, too damaged to properly account for during the chaos of the battle. Her daughter, now 13, stood beside her, having insisted on coming along despite the somber nature of the visit. "Did you know it would work?" her daughter asked. "The plan, I mean. Did you know Fleet Hydra would arrive in time?" Sarah considered the question carefully before answering, choosing honesty over comfort, as she always tried to do with her daughter. "No," she said. "I didn't know. Nobody could have known for certain. We built the best plan we could with what we had, and then we trusted each other to see it through, even when it cost more than any of us wanted to pay." "That sounds scary," her daughter said. "It was," Sarah agreed. "It still is, some nights. But being scared didn't stop anyone from doing what needed to be done. That's the part I hope you remember, more than any of the numbers, or the ships, or the battle itself. Being afraid, and doing the right thing anyway, that's what actually mattered." Above them, the sky was clear and blue, the same sky that had once been filled with the dark shapes of 11,000 alien ships, now empty except for the quiet, steady presence of human satellites, and the distant, watchful patrols of a rebuilding fleet that no longer needed to hide half its strength in secret. Earth had been outnumbered, badly, impossibly outnumbered, by an armada that had every reason to expect an easy victory. But Earth had also been patient, disciplined, and willing to pay a terrible price for the chance to fight another day. It had revealed its hidden second fleet at exactly the moment that mattered most, turning near certain defeat into a victory that would echo far beyond its own solar system, a victory that reminded a much larger galaxy that even the smallest, youngest species could refuse to be conquered, if it was willing to prepare, to sacrifice, and to hold the line long enough for hope to arrive. The war with the Zorath Dominion was not over. Both sides knew that. But for the first time in human history, Earth stood among the stars not as a hidden, frightened world hoping to go unnoticed, but as a species that had earned its place at the table, where the future of the galaxy would be decided, one hard-won battle at a time. In the years that followed, the battle above Earth came to be known simply as the Reckoning, a name that emerged organically from survivors and historians alike, rather than being chosen by any official committee. Schools taught it not as a story of simple triumph, but as a case study in the terrible cost of preparation, sacrifice, and the impossible decisions leaders sometimes had to make when the survival of an entire species hung in the balance. Dr. Amara Whitfield, who had spent the battle keeping pace with an overwhelming flow of casualties aboard the Sanctuary, later helped establish a new medical training program, specifically designed to prepare doctors and nurses for large-scale combat medicine, drawing on the brutal lessons learned during those desperate hours. "We were not ready for the scale of it," she said in an interview conducted years later. "No amount of peacetime training fully prepares you for that kind of loss, arriving all at once. But we learned, and now future doctors will be better prepared than we were." Lieutenant Commander Jenna Okoro, who had taken emergency command of the Meridian after her captain's death, went on to become one of the youngest ship captains in Sol Defense Fleet history, eventually commanding her own vessel in the newly expanded fleet. She kept a small piece of the Meridian's damaged bridge console in her new quarters, a reminder of the moment she had been forced to grow into a role she had never expected to fill so suddenly. Captain Diego Alvarez retired from active fighter duty 2 years after the battle, taking a position training new pilots, using combat data gathered from the engagement, determined to make sure the next generation of Sol Fleet aviators would enter any future conflict better prepared than his own generation had been. "We survived because we trained hard and got lucky with timing," he told his students candidly. "I'd rather the next crew not need luck at all." Chief Engineer Priya Nandakumar received Earth's highest civilian honor for her actions keeping the Resolute's reactor stable throughout the battle, though she insisted publicly, again and again, that the honor belonged equally to the 5 crew members who had stood beside her in that dangerous chamber, several of whom had suffered long-term radiation exposure as a result of their sacrifice. Vice Admiral Marcus Chen's role in the battle, once it became public knowledge, transformed him into something he had never sought to become, a symbol of quiet, careful preparation, succeeding where impulsive action would have failed. He used that unwanted public attention deliberately, advocating for continued investment in defensive technology, warning against the temptation to relax preparations simply because the immediate crisis had passed. "We survived because a small group of people spent 3 years preparing for a threat most of the public didn't know existed," he said in testimony before the newly formed Earth Unity Council 18 months after the battle. "That preparation cost real things: family time, personal relationships, years of secrecy that weighed heavily on everyone involved in Fleet Hydra's construction. I am not asking this council to repeat that exact model of secrecy. I am asking this council to understand that the difference between what we survived and what could have happened was measured in years of unglamorous, difficult preparation that nobody wanted to pay for until it was almost too late." The council listened, and in the years that followed, Earth's defense budget shifted permanently toward a model of sustained, transparent investment in both fleet strength and diplomatic outreach to species who had begun approaching Earth after word of the battle spread across the region of space, bordering Dominion territory. Admiral Sarah Cade eventually stepped back from frontline fleet command 5 years after the battle, taking a position overseeing the training of future admirals at the newly established Earth Defense Academy, built on the same principles that had guided Fleet Hydra's construction: careful preparation, honest acknowledgement of terrible costs, and a refusal to promise easy victories to anyone who had not yet faced the true weight of command. Her daughter Mia, by then a young woman of 18, chose to enter officer training herself, a decision that filled Sarah with a complicated mixture of pride and fear that she suspected every parent in the fleet understood in their own way. "You don't have to do this," Sarah told her daughter the night before Mia left for her first training assignment. "Nobody would think less of you for choosing a different life." "I know," Mia said, "but I watched what you did, Mom. I watched you carry the weight of every single name on that memorial wall, every single day since the battle. I want to understand that weight myself, not just admire it from a distance. I want to help make sure that if it ever happens again, we're even more ready than we were the first time." Sarah pulled her daughter into a tight embrace, thinking of all the ships and crews and impossible decisions that had led to this quiet moment between them. grateful beyond words that she had lived to see her daughter grow into a young woman capable of choosing such a difficult, meaningful path, with clear eyes and full understanding of what it might someday cost. "Then I'll be proud to serve alongside you," Sarah said, "whatever comes next." In the wider galaxy, word of Earth's victory continued to spread far beyond the small circle of species who had sent the first cautious delegations in the months following the battle. Among the many changes it brought, perhaps none was more significant than the shift in how other worlds under Dominion influence began to view the possibility of resistance itself. For nearly 2 centuries, the Zorath Dominion's expansion had gone largely unchallenged, not because every species it conquered lacked the will to resist, but because none had believed resistance could succeed against such overwhelming force. Earth's victory, hard-won and costly as it was, broke that belief permanently. Vice Admiral Chen, now leading fleet development, oversaw the establishment of a new training exchange program, inviting officers from allied species, including a small contingent of Velic naval cadets, to study alongside human officers at the Earth Defense Academy. It was slow, careful work, built on the same patient philosophy that had guided Fleet Hydra's construction years earlier. Nothing built quickly could be trusted to hold when it mattered most. "We are not simply building weapons anymore," Chen told the first graduating class of the joint training program. "We are building relationships, trust, and shared strength among species who once believed they stood alone against something too large to fight. That is, in its own way, an even more important victory than the one we won in orbit 5 years ago." Karnath, the Zorath intelligence officer who had once quietly doubted his commander's confidence during the battle, eventually became one of the first Dominion defectors to formally request asylum on Earth, 3 years after the Reckoning, bringing with him detailed knowledge of Dominion fleet doctrine that would prove invaluable in shaping Earth's continued defensive preparations. He never fully explained his reasons for defecting, though those who worked with him closely suspected it had something to do with the quiet, nagging doubt that had first taken root in his mind during those long hours watching Threxus's confidence slowly crumble above Earth's orbital defense zone. High Marshal Threxus himself was quietly removed from active command within a year of the battle, reassigned to a minor administrative post, far from any frontier engagement, a fate that, within Dominion military culture, was understood by everyone as a permanent and humiliating end to what had once been a distinguished career. He never spoke publicly about the battle again, though it was said among those who had served under him that he kept, in his private quarters, a small data record of the engagement, reviewing it occasionally, as though searching for the exact moment he might have done something differently. On the 10th anniversary of the battle, Earth held a quiet ceremony at the Geneva Memorial, now a permanent structure, inlaid with the names of every person lost defending the solar system that day. Admiral Sarah Cade, now serving as head of the Earth Defense Academy, stood beside Vice Admiral Marcus Chen, both of them older, both carrying the particular kind of quiet dignity that came from having survived something few people ever fully understood, unless they had lived through it themselves. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we'd been wrong?" Chen asked quietly, as the ceremony's crowds began to disperse into the cool evening air. "If Threxus hadn't taken the bait, if he'd kept his reserve fleet back just a little longer." "Every day," Sarah admitted. "But we weren't wrong, Marcus. We built something worth trusting, and we trusted the people who carried it out to do their part, even when it cost them everything. That's not luck. That's the result of years of hard work by thousands of people who believed enough in each other to make an impossible plan actually work." Chen nodded slowly, looking out over the names on the memorial wall, thinking of Tomas Reyes and the young engineer's daughter, now a teenager, who had grown up hearing stories about a father who had spent years working on a secret that had ultimately saved her entire world. He thought of Karnath and Threxus and the strange, complicated web of choices and consequences that had led to this quiet moment of remembrance, a decade removed from the desperate chaos of that single defining day. "To the people who held the line," Sarah said quietly, raising a small cup of coffee in a private toast that had become a personal tradition between the two officers each year on this date. "And to the ones who arrived just in time to make sure that line held for something worth holding." "To all of them," Chen agreed. Above them, the sky remained clear and quiet, watched over by a fleet built now not in secret desperation, but in open, shared strength, ready for whatever the galaxy might send toward Earth in the years still to come. Above them, as always, the sky remained clear and quiet, watched over now by a fleet that no longer needed to hide its true strength in the frozen dark, ready, should the day ever come again, to stand between Earth and whatever the wider galaxy might send against it. Prepared this time, not by desperate secrecy alone, but by the hard-won wisdom of a battle that had asked everything of those who fought it, and had, in the end, given humanity something it had never fully possessed before: a rightful, respected place among the stars.